Courtroom 401 had destroyed the careers of 23 prosecutors before her. Their tears, their broken spirits, their shattered dreams, all sacrificed at the altar of Judge Gates's corruption. Pam Bondi touched the recorder in her pocket and smiled. Today, the 24th prosecutor would be different. Because today, she had what none of them had, proof. The words echoed in her mind, sometimes the most powerful people are the most corrupt. But sometimes, she thought, the most corrupt people forget to check for recorders. The familiar scent of leather-bound law books and polished wood filled her nostrils as she approached Courtroom 401. Even the air felt heavy with decades of power and corruption. Her mother had been one of those 23, the first prosecutor Gates had destroyed 15 years ago. The stress of that case had accelerated her cancer. Gates hadn't even bothered to send condolences. Inside her briefcase, 3 weapons waited. The recorder, 18 minutes that would shatter Gates's carefully constructed empire. A USB drive, containing offshore account details that traced millions in bribes. And a photograph, taken at midnight behind the Riverside Casino, showing a judge who claimed to be incorruptible accepting an envelope from a man who would later be acquitted of murder. Ms. Bondi? Her assistant's whisper broke through her thoughts. The FBI team is in position. State Attorney General Morrison just arrived. Perfect. Gates had to be exposed in front of everyone. The press had been carefully tipped off about a major corruption scandal. Other judges were present for what they thought was a routine hearing. The audience was set. The heavy doors swung open. Charles Lawson, the real estate mogul on trial, sat at the defense table in his $5,000 suit, radiating the confidence of a man who had bought his way out of trouble countless times before. If only he knew he was about to become the star witness against his own protector. The bailiff's voice rang out, "All rise for the Honorable Judge Howard Gates." Honorable. The word almost made her laugh. Gates swept in, his black robes billowing like dark wings. His cologne, expensive and overwhelming, announced his presence before she saw him. He barely glanced at her as he took his seat, just as he had barely glanced at the 23 prosecutors before her. But unlike them, she had spent 6 months preparing for this moment. Every detail planned, every contingency considered. The recorder in her pocket felt warm against her hip, a constant reminder of what was at stake. Miss Bondi, Gates's voice dripped with familiar condescension. "I trust you're prepared to waste more of the court's time?" A few chuckles rippled through the defense team. Lawson adjusted his silk tie, exchanging knowing smirks with his attorneys. They'd seen this dance before, Gates humiliating another prosecutor who dared to challenge their carefully constructed system. But Pam didn't flinch. Instead, she pulled out a single document and approached the bench with measured steps. The click of her heels against the marble floor echoed like a metronome counting down to Gates's destruction. "Your Honor, the state has evidence of significant financial irregularities in Mr. Lawson's Riverside development project." She paused, letting the words hang in the air. Specifically, a discrepancy of $12 million. Gates's fingers drummed against his desk, a tell she'd noticed during her months of observation. He was nervous, though only she knew why. Irregularities? His voice cut through the air like a knife. "Or perhaps you're just unable to understand basic accounting, Miss Bondi? Like mother, like daughter, I suppose." The personal jab was meant to throw her off balance. 6 months ago, it might have worked. But now, it only confirmed what the recorder in her pocket proved, his desperation to keep her away from those accounts. Actually, Your Honor, she pulled out another document. I understand accounting quite well. Especially when it comes to offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. The drumming of Gates's fingers stopped abruptly. In the gallery, she noticed the State Attorney General lean forward slightly. That document, Gates's voice trembled almost imperceptibly, is inadmissible. Why? Pam's question hung in the air. Because it proves the connection between Mr. Lawson's missing millions and account number 8475309? The same account that received regular deposits matching the dates of every major ruling in your court? The defense team shifted uncomfortably. Lawson's face had lost its smirk, replaced by something closer to fear. He began whispering urgently to his lead attorney. Miss Bondi, Gates leaned forward, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, approach the bench. She moved forward, feeling every eye in the courtroom follow her. When she reached the bench, Gates spoke so only she could hear. You're playing a very dangerous game, little girl. Your mother learned the hard way what happens to people who dig too deep. Back off now, or your career won't be the only thing you lose. The threat hung between them, heavy with 15 years of history. But instead of fear, Pam felt a surge of cold satisfaction. The recorder in her pocket was catching every word. Funny you should mention games, Your Honor. She reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out the small black device. Because I've been playing one too. The color drained from Gates's face as she pressed play. His own voice filled the courtroom. Take care of it, his recorded voice commanded. I don't care what it takes. That evidence never reaches trial. And if Bondi becomes a problem like her mother, well, cancer runs in families, doesn't it? The silence that followed was absolute. Even the court reporter's fingers had frozen over her keyboard. In the gallery, the State Attorney General was already on his phone, nodding to the FBI agents positioned by the doors. Gates's face contorted with rage. This is outrageous. I will not allow. You won't allow what, Your Honor? Pam's voice was steel wrapped in silk. The truth? The courtroom erupted in chaos. Reporters scrambled for their phones. Jurors gasped. The defense team scattered like startled birds. But Pam kept her eyes fixed on Gates as the reality of his situation sank in. His face, once flushed with rage, now drained to ashen gray. 15 years of power crumbling in 18 minutes of recorded truth. This is impossible, he whispered, more to himself than anyone else. I am the law here. Not anymore, Pam replied quietly, then turned to face the stunned courtroom. Ladies and gentlemen, what you just heard is only the beginning. For years, Judge Gates has been accepting bribes to manipulate cases, threatening prosecutors who got too close and protecting criminals like Mr. Lawson. As if on cue, Lawson suddenly bolted from his chair. Wait. I want to make a deal. The FBI agents moved swiftly to block the exits. State Attorney General Morrison stood, his face grim with purpose. Charles Lawson, you're under arrest for conspiracy and bribery. I'll tell you everything. Lawson blurted, his $5,000 suit suddenly seeming to hang loose on his trembling frame. The offshore accounts, the fake development projects, the other judges involved. Shut up, you fool. Gates roared, but his authority had evaporated like morning mist. 7 other judges, Lawson continued desperately. Real estate deals, laundered money, fixed cases, every ruling had a price. Each word was another nail in Gates's coffin. Each confession another brick pulled from the wall of corruption they'd built. The FBI agents approached the bench. "Howard Gates, you're under arrest for judicial corruption, conspiracy, and..." The lead agent paused, glancing at Pam, "making terroristic threats against a state prosecutor." As the handcuffs clicked around Gates's wrists, the mighty judge who had terrorized this courtroom for decades finally broke. "You don't understand," he snarled at Pam. "We built this system. It doesn't work without us." "No," Pam replied, gathering her evidence. "It's finally starting to work without you." She watched as they led Gates away, his black robes now looking less like wings of authority and more like a shroud. But before he reached the door, he turned back. "How long?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "How long have you been planning this?" Pam met his eyes. "Since the day you told my dying mother that justice was for sale." She smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "That was your first mistake. Underestimating her daughter was your last." The doors closed behind him with a final, heavy thud. In the gallery, reporters were already rushing out to file their stories. The headlines would write themselves: "Judge arrested in court, corruption ring exposed." State Attorney General Morrison approached her, shaking his head in amazement. 23 prosecutors tried to bring him down. "What made you different?" Pam touched the silver locket around her neck, her mother's last gift. Inside was a small photo and 7 words that had guided her through the past 6 months: "The truth fears nothing but concealment." "The others tried to fight him with the law," she said quietly. "I fought him with the truth." Morrison nodded thoughtfully. "There will be more cases like this. More corrupt judges, more broken systems." "Good," Pam replied, picking up her briefcase. "Because I'm just getting started." The next morning, every newspaper in the state carried the same headline: "Judge arrested in court, corruption ring exposed." Below it, a photo of Gates being led away in handcuffs, his black robes a stark contrast against the silver steel. In her office, Pam studied the growing pile of evidence on her desk. Lawson had talked through the night, revealing a web of corruption that stretched back 20 years. 7 judges, dozens of developers, hundreds of millions in bribes. Each confession opening another door, exposing another shadow. Her phone hadn't stopped ringing since dawn. Reporters wanted statements. Other prosecutors wanted advice. Whistleblowers, emboldened by Gates's fall, were coming forward with new evidence of judicial corruption across the state. But Pam was focused on one particular document, a list of cases Gates had deliberately mishandled. Cases where innocent people went to jail. Cases where justice had been sold to the highest bidder. Cases she would now help make right. A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. Her assistant entered with another stack of files. "More victims coming forward," he said, placing them carefully on her desk. "They're calling you the Judge Hunter now." Pam smiled, remembering Gates's final words as they led him away: "You've destroyed everything." "No," she had replied. "I've just helped rebuild it." She picked up the first file and opened it. There was still work to be done. Because justice wasn't just about taking down the corrupt, it was about lifting up those they had wronged. As the morning sun streamed through her office window, she found a letter that had been slipped under her door. Opening it, she read, "Dear Ms. Bondi, I was wrongly convicted in Judge Gates's court 5 years ago. Today, I heard what you did. For the first time in years, I have hope. Thank you for showing us that one person's courage can change the system." Maria Rodriguez. Pam touched her mother's locket, feeling the familiar warmth of the silver against her skin. Inside, her mother's photo seemed to smile at her, proud of what her daughter had become. "This is just the beginning," she whispered to the photo. "We're going to fix it all, Mom. One corrupt judge at a time." Because in the end, corruption thrives not because of the power of bad people, but because of the silence of good people. And sometimes, all it takes to change the world is the courage to speak up. The truth fears nothing but concealment. And Pam Bondi was done with hiding. If this story moved you, if it made you believe in justice again, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to hear more stories of courage that change the world, one courtroom at a time. Remember, the power to make a difference isn't just in the hands of prosecutors and judges, it's in your hands too.